Welcome to Cultural Anthropology. This is part one of a three-part presentation on the basics of cultural anthropology. And it may be a little bit boring, but life is boring at times, and life is sometimes exciting at times. You have to crawl before you could walk. And if you really want to get through the boring part, you could click this button on the lower right, and then the screen will go much faster, and then you'll get through it really faster. So just click the button now. Oh, just kidding. But press and go to the next slide. Cultural anthropology. It's the study of cultures of people in groups. Now, there's a lot in there, and these first three shows are going to have definitions which you're going to be using in your writings for the rest of the term. Notice the S on culture. How couldn't you? I took the extra time to put it in a different color. It means that no single group has a single culture, even if we see them as the simplest society or the most isolated society in the world. They're much more complex. Now, anthropology differs from sociology, which if you lived in the unreal heteronormative, heterogeneous world of make-believe, which doesn't exist and never did, its mothers and fathers would be sociology. Sociology looks at the rules, look at the regulations, but anthropology, while it uses sociology, looks at the beliefs behind these rules. Sadly, and don't tell anyone this because it's a secret we don't like to share, sociology's real heritage is a bad one. It comes out of colonialism, working for the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and other government agencies, both in the United States and Russia and in Europe, that were designed to control indigenous people. Same with US and European museums that tended to steal things that belonged to other cultures, churches that said our way or too bad, you're going to die, and even corporations. And anthropology differs from psychology, history, economics, law, the arts, religious study, theology, and biology. But we use all of these in what we refer to as our holistic method. And a holistic method combines all these factors for the main purpose, which is to compare and contrast with present and past cultures and even existence, especially of human and pre-human societies. My kids tell me I repeat myself. Watch this slide and see if they're right. Too often our subjects are colonialized minorities and lower classes. Why? Because they're not protected. We have a carte blanche to go in there, or did, to study them. They have no protections. They have no options. Sometimes even aid was attached to being subject. So the first anthropologists, and there are always exceptions, were government employees, workers for the Bureau of Indian Affairs, worked for the Central Intelligence Agency, worked for museums, or were even missionaries. This is not unlike the history of all social sciences. And you will see that if you look at any of the others. But then it happened. You all remember the 1960s. Oh, you were too young. Hey, I was there. Like, wow, whoa, what an experience. Oh, I'm getting sidetracked. But it was a time of social movements, civil rights, anti-war, women's movement, and environmental movement. One that often gets overlooked, but has really shaped even what you'll be doing in this class, was a movement where people began to look at their disciplines and see who they were serving and who they were not serving. And graduate students were able to track how anthropologists were getting funded and found out that so many anthropologists were being, as were psychologists, as were sociologists, were being funded by the government to do the government's will. And it particularly came to surface during the Vietnam War, where the US government was being contracting anthropologists to win the hearts and minds of people. Now, in the 1970 American anthropological meetings, this exploded, and there were floor fights, threats of censorship, and out of this meeting, anthropology really changed directions. Now our primary responsibility is to ensure the safety of people being studied. It's quite a fun meeting. And the 60s were kind of fun too. Okay, now for some terms. Here's the biggie: culture. I had to memorize this, and it hasn't changed, and it won't change. The definition: learned body of knowledge, norms, beliefs, arts, laws, morals, customs, and habits, symbolically shared and transmitted by members of a society and passed on from one generation to the next. Let's break that down. Learned. It is not instinctual. You're not, just because you're born someplace, become that culture. You have to learn it. Knowledge is what a specific culture knows and what other cultures don't know. You from New Jersey don't know how to pump gas. The rest of us do. Norms, beliefs, arts, laws, morals, customs, and habits are all encroached in culture. For example, there's a very famous painting, you know this, of the Last Supper, right? Where they're all sitting around the table. But if you look at it in Peru, the center of the table is cuy, or guinea pig, because they adapted that painting to their own culture. Now, symbolic. Symbol is a very important word. Symbol is what is mutually agreed upon by members of a society. Here's a symbol: the American flag. To many people in the United States, it means patriotism, it means freedom. You put that flag up someplace else in the world, it might be burned because it's a symbol of oppression. So symbolically shared, but given meaning by specific cultures. Transmitted is the same as learned by members of a culture in a society, and it passes on from one generation to the next. Ever think about why your parents hate you? That's because culture is always changing. Your culture is not their culture. Culture is dynamic rather than static, and many of your own beliefs and values differ from your parents. So culture is a very important term. Also, what culture is not is important. It's not instinctual. I have a granddaughter. She laughs a lot. She laughs in a certain way. If she were raised in Japan, she would laugh in a different way. Even something as basic as a child's laugh is not instinctual. It's a reflection. It is not universal. Now, this has two meanings. And you're going to see some of this in your second reading, where an anthropologist is interpreting Shakespeare very differently than the people she is studying with. Universally generally means the same across the world. And no culture, nothing is the same across the world. Even institutions such as marriage are different in different cultures. You're going to read, I believe, in your third reading about a culture where a woman is permitted to have 3 husbands. Guys, relax. And that's okay. You're going to read in another culture that has quite a bit of starvation, where they won't eat cows. We're going to look at why that is. But again, values are not universal. And again, no culture is homogeneous. Even within a culture, there are different values different beliefs. And it's by generation, it's by gender, and depending on the culture, other factors as well. Just a few more terms. Ethnography, you're all doing an ethnography. You can look in course content and see some of the guidelines, and it's discussed a great deal in other parts of this class, but it's interpreting the culture. You're going to do one, you can see the guidelines, and if you do it and follow the guidelines, you will probably get an A on it. It's the easiest piece of writing you have to do. Ethnocentricity is judging a culture by your own values. Like, don't go, yeah, when you see something, but understand that your values being used to interpret another culture. A simple one is we are supposed to wipe our mouths at the end of a meal. In other cultures, they're permitted to burp. Not disgusting, just very different. Or, as you'll see in one of the articles, again, the one about Shakespeare, in our culture, if somebody has more than one spouse, we consider them on the cheating side of town. In other cultures, it has a purpose and should be judged that way, which leads us to the term cultural relativism. That is judging cultures in the context of their own world. I know you really want to jump ahead and read about the one husband, one wife, and three husbands, but you have to judge about why this occurs there, rather than our version that there's something wrong with it. But there's also something called absolute relativism. Yes, we understand through cultural relativism why cultures interpret things the way they do, but we don't absolutely have to accept it. And those are value judgments that we will hold on to. A few more terms. Informant. These are our gatekeepers. When you go to a culture, you're not going to be able to talk to everyone. You're going to select a few people. In the first article about the Kung, you should pay special attention to who the gatekeepers are, because the anthropologist Richard Lee is getting his information on that culture through their eyes. And there's also dangers of this, because I think if we ask each one of you to interpret our common culture, we would get very different points of view. And that's the danger. Now, I often will try to talk to children, not because I'm a weirdo, but because children, A, don't lie and haven't learned to cover up as much. And they'll give me a most honest appraisal. The photos on your right show my son, who's now 35 and a college professor, and his Navajo friend, Kelly. They were fishing and then they were chilling. Kelly taught me more about the Navajo, and I spent a lot of time with the Navajo than with any other culture. And than her parents did, than anybody else did. But Kelly also taught me some stories that helped to interpret culture. I'll give you a short one now. Most of you have seen the movie Free Willy, and if not, you've seen the movie, even if it had a different title and different characters. It's a typical Western movie where you have good guys, bad guys, chase scene, good guys win. Well, I took Kelly and my son Sam to see that. We're all in Alaska, actually. Our families were working with the Eskimo up in Alaska for 5 summers. And I took Kelly. I was the least useful of the 4 parents, so I got to take the kids to the movie. And I talked them to see Free Willy. Everybody but Kelly left really happy. She was pissed. She was angry. She shoved my son, which is something she would never do, and said, I'm walking home. If you've been to Alaska, did I mention I've been there 5 times? You don't walk anywhere. It's too far. So when we got back, I asked her mother, who was a full-blooded Navajo, Lorraine, what's up with Kelly? She said, you're a smart anthropologist. You figure it out yourself. And 3 days later, I did. When natives watch movies on reservation and see themselves, they see themselves as the bad guys and as losers. So Kelly's reaction to any movie is to root for the bad guys. That's how you can learn from other people. There's also a term called cultural shock, meaning that you're going to see things that might surprise you as anthropologist. You might be uncomfortable with. You might even lose your bearings for a while. Just be prepared. Then there's a term deviance. Deviance is often misinterpreted. It's not going against the laws, but it's going against the beliefs of a specific reference group. A specific reference group. We're going to read a great deal about the Navajo this term. And if somebody practices the traditional religion, they're deviant to the modernist. If somebody rejects that religion, they're deviant to the traditionalist. So we have to understand what we're talking about. There's two more terms I want you to know. Reading on time and getting your work done on time. Otherwise, your grades will go down. Last slide. Stop! I need a break. Go to the discussion board and answer the question on dynamic culture. When you do that, return to the introduction of anthropology, part 2.